On July the 2nd, a gas pipeline in the Gulf of Mexico ruptured, sparking this fire. According to Reuters, it was the result of damage from an electrical storm and heavy rains. In response, a leading Democrat, California's governor, Gavin Newsom, said this: "The ocean is literally on fire, but yeah, sure, we can't afford climate action." Could there be a statement that is at one and the same time as stupid, shallow, cynical, and false as that one? The ocean was not literally on fire. The gas that leaked from the pipeline was on fire, and it was put out and cleaned up within 5 hours. It had nothing to do with climate change. It was an accident. So why did Gavin Newsom lie about it? Why did he suggest that climate change was the culprit and climate action, whatever he means by that, is the answer? Because this is what Democrats do. They lie about climate all the time. And to be clear, saying that is not denying the reality of climate change. It's the Democrats who are denying climate change reality in favor of a dark climate fantasy.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
An existential threat to us as human beings.
The existential threat of climate change is an existential threat.
We have less than 12 years before there will be irreparable damage done to this country.
The world is not going to end in 12 years or less than 12 years. We are not facing an existential threat. There is nothing in the science that suggests human life on Earth will cease to exist. Climate change is real. Climate catastrophism is demonstrably false. In 2014, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published what they called Representative Concentration Pathways, RCPs, for future global warming. RCP 8.5 was the most extreme scenario and became the basis for the Democrat doomsday chorus. But it's wildly unrealistic. For example, it assumes a 5-fold increase in coal burning, more than some estimates of total coal reserves. In 2020, climate scientists in Nature magazine called out the catastrophism. They said, stop using the worst-case scenario for climate warming. Even David Wallace Wells, who wrote a book called The Uninhabitable Earth, now says, we're getting a clearer picture of climate change and it's not as bad as it once looked. He called on climate advocates to be less alarmist. And yet the media, complicit in the Democrats' climate lies, hype up every single thing they can to stoke the sense of impending doom. They call it a climate crisis, but they're manufacturing a climate of crisis.
Concerns are growing that the high temperatures could cause more devastating wildfires.
We are in a historic drought here in the West.
Yeah. The Pacific Northwest battles a climate crisis.
Era of climate emergency.
I believe we are in a climate crisis.
This is the last shot this country has to deal with the climate crisis.
Our last shot. Where have we heard that before? Oh, right. 15 years ago, when Al Gore said we had 10 years left. They're no different to the people they mock, like evangelist Harold Camping, who predicted the end of the world on September the 6th, 1994. And when it didn't happen, just change the date. The Democrats' climate cult takes a real issue and turns it into a fear-mongering caricature. Yes, there is a drought, but water shortages are a man-made problem. In California, the reservoir system is designed for a climate with frequent droughts. 2019 was a wet year. The reservoirs were full, actually at 128% of average, with enough water for 5 years. But just 2 years later, they're telling us we have a water shortage. That's not because of the climate, it's because of mismanagement. For years, they've been flushing the water out to the ocean in a pointless bid to protect a species of fish that has barely been seen for decades. Last year, President Trump predicted this would happen, and here we are. Gavin Newsom, this week, telling Californians to cut their water use by 15%, after he wasted 50%. The left blamed climate change for wildfires, but wildfires ravaged the West long before the recent rise in temperatures. Last year, around 4 million acres burned in California. The Democrats and the media said it was proof that climate change caused the wildfires. But before European settlers arrived in the 19th century, more than 4 million acres burned pretty much every year. Although typically each individual fire was smaller because the forests were healthier, not least thanks to the stewardship of the native population who actually understood nature, unlike today's ludicrous lefty climate cultists who couldn't tell a healthy forest from a pot plant. The actual causes of the devastating wildfires sweeping the West are devastatingly stupid Democrat policies. Decades of fire suppression stopping the natural burns that kept forests diverse and healthy. Failure to remove dead trees and brush, creating a catastrophic accumulation of fuel. Hopeless mismanagement of energy utilities, leading to more ignitions from power lines. Inaction on one of the causes of wildfires that's barely mentioned by left-wing politicians and their TV cheerleaders, arson. If you actually wanted to do something about water or wildfires, there are plenty of practical steps you could take. But no, all we get from Democrats is pathetic tweets blaming it all on climate. Next, they'll be blaming the border crisis that they created on climate. Oh, wait, they already did. Why do they push these obvious climate lies? Because when it comes to climate, the Democrats have adopted the tactic of authoritarian tyrants through the ages, manufacture a crisis to justify a draconian crackdown. They know the facts don't justify their extremist agenda. Closing down the fossil fuel industry, banning the cars millions of Americans drive, banning the way most of us cook. They want everything to run on electricity. And where do they want that to come from? More solar power, which can't be economically stored. And how clean is solar anyway when the panels are made with coal and slave labor from China? They want more wind, which is intermittent, unreliable, kills up to 500,000 birds a year. On top of that, they want to shut down nuclear power, which is the most reliable, carbon-free source of energy we've got. And guess how these climate leaders are filling the gap? In California, they're importing oil from Saudi Arabia. You can't make it up. Their entire energy and environment policy is a giant stinking slick of idiocy and contradiction. No to American oil and gas, yes to Saudi Arabia's. No to American pipelines, yes to Putin's. Make us more dependent on electricity while making electricity less dependable. Why aren't these Democrats being laughed off the stage when they preach about climate? They're not the party of science. They deny science. They deny science on the pandemic, on lockdowns, on masks, on reopening schools. They deny science on two-parent families, on kids and gender, on drug use. And above all, the Democrats deny science on climate. They blame climate change for things that have nothing to do with it. They push policies that wouldn't make a difference to it. And they block policies like nuclear power that would help. What do they know about the environment anyway? The closest most of these people have ever come to nature is dinner at the Rainforest Cafe. What a massive opportunity for conservatives. We know nature. We love nature. We want to protect and preserve and, yes, conserve nature. Let's fight back against the Democrats' climate lies, because they're not just lying about the issue. They're lying about Republicans, and we can't let them get away with it. It was Mike Braun, a Republican senator, who just introduced legislation to help farmers get paid for sustainable practices. It was Ron DeSantis, a Republican governor, who signed a $400 million land conservation bill. And it was Donald Trump, a Republican president, who signed the most sweeping conservation legislation in a generation and whose pro-growth, pro-innovation, pro-America policies lowered our carbon emissions, while the sneering, sanctimonious so-called environmentalists in Canada saw theirs go up, even with a carbon tax. Pro-conservation, pro-markets and innovation, pro-nuclear energy, above all pro-America. That's the climate revolution we need, and it's conservatives who can lead it.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.